Hey, welcome back, everyone. A lot I want to talk about today. First of all, there's talk that Hunter Biden might actually be arrested. It's actually a Trump appointed judge who's going to be overseeing this. The Department of Justice is suggesting they're not going to intervene. We'll see where this goes. I'll be telling you all exactly what's happening with this today. Also, there's a very strange update, and it's something I actually have not seen other media report on. Joe Biden issued a very strange executive order around spy operations, and in this, I was reading the document and I noticed a few very strange things. The wording of his executive order could give him unilateral spy powers in the way I'm interpreting it. I want to show you what I found in this and kind of lay out what exactly this means. Um, I have not seen this reported elsewhere, and so maybe this. I guess this is an exclusive today. We're going to be going over. That said, folks, always a pleasure having you all here. Real quick too, don't forget to tune in tomorrow. I'm going to be going over what the Surgeon General in Florida is talking about, where he's saying that the mRNA vaccines are killing men. About 85% increase. They now have to give warnings if a man or if anybody wants to get an mRNA vaccine. They now have to give warnings that at least in men it raises your death rate from heart failure and so on by about 85%. Just correcting myself from yesterday as well. I believe yesterday I said Attorney General. I meant to say Surgeon General. It's the Florida Surgeon General. So don't forget, tomorrow is going to be a really interesting day. I'm going to go over that and a lot of the stuff on the vaccines. All right, that said, let's jump into the first story. I want to get right into this. Joe Biden, appears to have given himself unilateral spy powers. And, this is from, he was vice president under Obama, the surveiller in chief. People called him the guy who was spying on Trump when Trump was running for office. And remember, Trump came out and said, they spied on me, they were spying on my home, and so on like that. And all the media said that he was lying, and then it turned out actually it was right. The FBI under the Obama administration was in fact spying on Trump. Well, Joe Biden, who at the time was vice president and now is president of the United States, kind of, he has issued now an executive order that really gives him, incredible spy powers. Let me lay out exactly what this says, because the powers, as far as I'm viewing this, the big change, the real powers he's giving himself, come within the technicalities of how this works. And let me explain to you what I found with this. Now, it says here, this is White House. It's called the White House It's Executive Order on Enhancing Safeguards for United States Signals Intelligence Activities. Signals intelligence, or SIGINT, that would be like surveillance powers, digital spying, and that kind of thing. It says here, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered as follows. And it says, Section 1, Purpose. The purpose, they're saying, is the United States collects signals intelligence so that its national security decision makers have access to timely, accurate, and insightful information necessary to advance the national security interests of the United States and to protect its citizens and the citizens of its allies and partners from harm. Further in, under principles, it states, signals intelligence activities shall be authorized and conducted consistent with the following principles. And folks, bear with me. I'll break this down. Bear with me. A lot of this is technical legalese and government speak. Like this is their like language, right? But I'll break this down. So just let me get through it and I'll break it down. Under principles, it says, signals intelligence activities shall be authorized by statute or by executive order. Order, proclamation, or other presidential directive, and undertaken in accordance with the Constitution and the applicable statutes and executive orders, proclamations, and other presidential directives. Further in, it states, legitimate objectives. Signals intelligence collection activities shall be conducted only in pursuit of one or more of the following objectives. And I won't go over all of this. I'm skipping around a bit because it's just a lot of technical stuff, and a lot of it is just kind of discussing legitimate activities. It does talk here, for example, a lot about foreign threats, the ability to monitor foreign threats, foreign government influence. This includes threats to U.S. government. Notably, though, this includes anything that would threaten U.S. government personnel, property, and threats to the elections. And so, interestingly, when it talks about threats to government property, if they believed, for example, there might be a repeat of the siege on the Capitol building, that this could constitute something they might use to justify spying. But that's not the real big part I'm getting at. The big part is here. It states under B, further down, the president, get this, the president may authorize updates to the list of objectives in light of new national security imperatives, such as new or heightened threats to the national security of the United States, for which the president determines that signals intelligence collection activities may be used. So it's the president's decision to authorize updates to the list of intelligence collection. So if the president essentially wants to spy on someone or something, it is included here the ability to do that under this executive order. The ability, even though it's not contained in this so much, right? It does lay out vaguely threats to government property, personnel, threats to the elections, and so on. If the president of himself decides that something should be spied on, it gives the president that ability. And then it says this: the Director of National Intelligence, also just called Director in the document, shall publicly release any updates to the list of objectives authorized by the President. So here it's saying that if the President, under sole authority, right, this gives sole authority to the President of the United States to decide to spy on something new. That's what this says. The President now has the ability to just spy on whatever he wants, but there's a safeguard, which is if they do that, if Biden decides it's something like Trump, for example, should be spied on, then the Director of National Intelligence is required to publicly release any updates. So he would have to tell the public, but there's a caveat to that, and it says this: unless, this is the exact quote, unless the president determines that doing so would pose a risk to the national security of the United States. So let's break that down. Under this executive order, the President of the United States has unilateral power to determine who should be spied on, to give himself the ability to spy on new targets, and if the President, the person who's initiated these spying activities, himself, and nobody else, it says the President, himself determines that it should not be told or exposed publicly or even be talked about, the President can make the sole decision to not have that disclosed. What this does is, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I have not seen anybody else report this yet. What this does is gives unilateral power to the President of the United States to spy on whoever he wants, whatever he wants, again, because it's in the ability to expand these powers, and then to withhold that information from the public based solely on the discretion of the President. This is. I was reading this yesterday. It blew my mind. I can't believe nobody else has mentioned this, frankly. How can the President of the United States essentially do things without the requirement of public disclosure when again, they're instituting new spying activities? And keep in mind the context of this again, that this is Biden, who was vice president under Obama, who did in fact spy on Trump at the time, the rival political candidate to, their party, the Democrats. We know that they were aware that this was, we know they were aware that the whole Crossfire hurricane and Trump Russia dossier was, a bunch of nonsense. It was falsified, paid for by the Democrat Party and the Hillary Clinton campaign. We know that the FBI had assessed that the sources and evidence were not basically there, that it was, it didn't exist, but they used that anyway to spy on a candidate and then to spy on a sitting president and then to try to remove that sitting president from office using evidence they knew was falsified. This is the same guy who was in that administration under Obama when they initiated this, giving himself unilateral powers, and I think it's fair to call it that, unilateral powers to initiate spying activities and to withhold that from the public. Again, maybe nobody read it fully, but correct me if I'm wrong, but this is what it says, frankly. And you often find this as well, that, oftentimes government organizations, and this isn't just the U.S. government, a lot of agencies do it. The Chinese Communist Party does it. The United Nations does it. They'll often include language that they can use for arguments. And so if you or I, for example, right? If you or I, for example, were to, well, I guess I'm saying it, but if I were to get in an argument with, say, the government over this, and I said, well, if I didn't know the content well enough, and I said, well, Biden just gave himself the ability to spy on whoever he wants, and as part of the executive order, he doesn't have to disclose it. They'd say, no, it says directly that the Director of National Intelligence shall publicly release any updates to the list of objectives authorized by the president. They'd say that. And they'd say, obviously, you're wrong in saying that, but they will, again, say that as a half-truth because they'll omit the second half of that statement, which states, unless the president determines that doing so would pose a risk to the national security of the United States. In other words, he can override that requirement. And again, you find this deception through technicality very often when it comes to these things. And again, the real, if you read the whole thing in terms of what it's allowing intelligence collection on, it's not that bad, honestly. It's mostly, in terms of things it's talking about, it's mostly talking about spying on foreign threats to the United States. It's very heavily focused on foreign threats, not domestic threats. And so, they could easily say Americans concerned this will apply to Americans. Don't need to worry about it because it's almost entirely, other than talking about threats to the election and threats to government property, it's almost solely focused on external threats, foreign threats. Of course, they could lie and say Russia is backing this Russian, backing the Hunter Biden dossier, which is Russian disinformation trying to undermine the elections, which, remember, the intelligence community said in the 2020 elections, thereby altering the outcome of the elections, which we'll get into later. It could apply to things like that, technically. But the real gist of this, the concern this could be used for domestic espionage, is the power that it grants to the president, where it says the president may authorize updates to the list of objectives in light of new national security imperatives. And again, that the president, Biden himself, can authorize updates. He can expand these spy powers to whatever he wants, anything he wants. If he himself says that, it's a national security imperative. All he has to say is, this is a national security imperative, and all he has to say to withhold that from the public is just claim on his own, because it's sole authority, that it would pose a risk to national security if it were publicly disclosed. The authority on all these key points is solely for the president. This is unilateral powers to the president for spy operations. A very concerning executive order that, again, I have not seen anybody else cover, at least not in terms of breaking it down like this. Folks, before I go on, I want to go deeper into some of what's happening right now, because there's concerns about how this could be applied based on current behavior of the intelligence community, particularly the FBI and the Department of Justice, DOJ specifically, even targeting pro-life activists now. Apparently, it's fine to declare a Chaz site an autonomous zone in a major city in the United States, but if you go and sing hymns in front of an abortion clinic, you could get raided by the FBI. So I'll go over this in a minute. First, though, folks, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by Secure. Over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data and activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, which has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. Secure does not mine your data, ask for your phone number, or upload your contacts. It functions by adding people you know, then adding their secure numbers. You can also invite people to it. Now, folks, it's $5 for the messenger, $7 for the email, or $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring today's episode. Now, let's get a bit deeper into this stuff. Those of you curious, by the way, the tea today is ginseng tea. Now, let me explain a couple things. Now, there are loopholes. Before I go into some of what's happening right now in the political targeting, there are some loopholes with domestic espionage. Technically, the government is not allowed to spy on American citizens. You could argue, and I think it should be more strongly argued, that it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, right? Unauthorized, illegal searches and seizures. You know, the digital age really changed kind of the game, I think, when it came to the government's ability to spy and to violate the personal space and privacy of American citizens. The Constitution protects against behaviors like that. The redcoats, the British troops would just, prior to the American Revolution, barge into the homes of American citizens, search, seize whatever they wanted, and that was basically legally protected. The Founding Fathers understood that that type of government behavior should not be allowed unless it is provably justified. There needs to be very strong evidence to justify such behavior. Even under the Constitution, if criminal behavior is discovered through unethical means that violate the law, violate the Constitution, even if they do find evidence, that evidence can be thrown out. The case cannot be prosecuted because you would call that fruit of the poisonous tree. The methods used in obtaining it are illegal and cannot be recognized. The digital age, the internet and so on, changed that quite a bit because people surrender so much of their personal information. If you use, for example, on your smartphone, a lot of different apps, Facebook, Twitter, and so on, you grant them access to a lot of personal data. Sometimes you can even grant them, if you're not careful, access to your camera on your phone, access to your microphone, even access that can be activated and tapped into while the device is not turned on, depending on the app. Meaning that basically, you agree through the terms of service to a permanent spying program. And government, through various cooperation programs, can get access to that data. And so a lot of these programs and smartphones and technologies, through terms of service and public-private partnerships, really open the door to forms of domestic surveillance, the likes of which I think even George Orwell could not have imagined. In the book 1984, George Orwell imagined this future where your TV spies on you, these telescreens. These days, and you can't fully turn it off. These days, we keep our telescreens in our pockets. They're with us everywhere we go. There's no way of getting away from it. This surveillance state and the type of tyranny that can emerge from a surveillance state. Now, these powers were, of course, expanded very heavily under the Bush administration. That was the Patriot Act. Under the Patriot Act and the narrative of foreign terrorism, threats of terrorism, and so on, like Bandier Bush. Anyone know who Bandier Bush is? Also known as Bandier bin Laden. It's an interesting story. I encourage you all to look into it. The Bush administration created the ability to spy on Americans because of foreign terror threats and so on, which they say justified certain types of domestic surveillance and monitoring of people based on the narrative of terrorism. That narrative of terrorism has now been expanded, and they're talking about DVEs, domestic violent extremism. And the FBI is creating cases across the entire country using January 6th as the, kind of Trojan horse to do that. By using January 6th as the Trojan horse, claiming it was domestic terrorism, an attempted coup, an attempted overthrow of the government, everybody being investigated for that, even your 90-year-old woman, with a little American flag or whatever, is being investigated as a domestic terrorist if she stepped foot in the Capitol or even went there to protest. That type of behavior, essentially, then, the government is doing is creating a very broad narrative and justification for this type of surveillance. Now, under the FISA court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, operations, it's still very difficult for them to spy on Americans. This is done through 702, which is the ability to unseal information. Typically, if, let's say, for example, you have a cousin in France, for example, and you're talking to that cousin in France, if they deem your cousin in France as a threat, they can actually take your communications. But you, as an American citizen, would have your identity sealed within those conversations. The 702 process would allow that data to be unsealed. The Obama administration was abusing 702 like it was going out of style. They were unsealing the identities of Trump associates, everybody around Trump, using, again, the narrative that they had fabricated of this whole Trump-Russia thing, which ironically they had paid for, the Democrats had paid for alongside the Clinton campaign, using falsified information that even the FBI knew was false, collected from Russian sources, ironically. In other words, it was literally Russian disinformation masquerading as intelligence of Trump working with Russian disinformation. It's very, very ironic because they were accusing him of what they themselves have done. The point being with all of this is essentially now there's a very large-scale domestic spy operation that is activated, that is able to be tapped into, and violations of it, very aggressive and very significant violations of it, have been continuing without any kind of prosecution or accountability. You could argue that they've had oversight, but that oversight is not, it's toothless. It hasn't done anything. It's done nothing to really stop this type of behavior. And I think until something is done to stop this type of behavior, sorry, are we frozen? Until something is done to stop this type of behavior, I really do believe that it's going to continue, unfortunately. Now, folks, that being said, we do have some other updates on this, which is kind of what the FBI appears to be focusing on and where things seem to be going right now. Now, let me go into a bit of what's happening right now with the Biden administration and how they're targeting people. LifeSite News had something interesting, and it shows just part of a very broad trend. There's a concern now, basically, of how these types of spy operations could be applied. Now, I just laid out, of course, the new unilateral powers Biden has granted to himself to spy on pretty much anything he wants. Which blows my mind, frankly. And frankly, I hope more people look into that because I don't think anybody else has reported it yet. It was me just taking a late night and just reading documents. There's some broad concerns over how this could be applied, and also looking at precedent, past examples of, again, domestic surveillance, and how the Obama administration, maybe Obama administration Part 2, it had and may still possibly use this type of, these types of powers. We see some examples of this already at work. For example, the school boards calling for terrorist investigations into parents, alleging that parents were making what could constitute domestic violence threats based on no evidence, but Merrick Garland at the DOJ decided to move on it anyways. Based on no evidence, suggesting that Merrick Garland at the Department of Justice has demonstrated the willingness to initiate domestic spy operations, including terrorist investigations based on zero evidence. They do not need evidence to launch domestic terror investigations or to spy on anybody other than one group saying, hey, you should do this. Suggesting as well that the checks and balances, the things that would prevent someone from doing something unethical are basically not there when it comes to the way the Department of Justice and the FBI under it are operating. That the type of red tape that would prevent them from abusing their rights and abusing the rights of citizens, it has been cut, and we see that already in action. They did not. The parent one is a perfect example because there was no evidence. There were no police documents or anything like that backing or justifying that type of behavior that the school board was calling for, which the DOJ under Merrick Garland did in fact initiate. Right, there was nothing to justify it, and they did it anyways. We now see the Medical Association calling for terrorist investigations into journalists and others who are challenging the trans narrative. And again, we don't know if the Department of Justice is going to investigate journalists because they're claiming that the speech of journalists by raising concerns over the trans movement, by raising concern, and they're not saying journalists directly, but this is being taken in context that, of course, individuals like Matt Walsh and stuff are the ones blowing the whistle over certain things that started a lot of the controversies that the Medical Association is raising concern over. We know that they basically, I won't go too into that. The point being that you again, we don't know if they're actually moving on this, but based on precedent, we could assume that they may be. And again, it's very concerning the way this is developing. We also see other elements within this trend. LifeSite News says something. They said Biden DOJ, Department of Justice again, charges pro-life dad Mark Huck for alleged offense not found on original complaint, suggesting that the FBI under the Merrick Garland Department of Justice is even creating its own charges beyond what people who are filing complaints are even alleging. And this actually has even broader implications than what's even being stated publicly, because the FBI seems to be even bypassing to an extent under Merrick Garland, even local law enforcement, where minor disputes are being handled by the FBI under what could be considered, political topics. Let me explain to you what happened with this one individual. It says, according to Huck's family, outside one of the centers last year, these abortion centers, Huck pushed a 70-year-old pro-abortion activist, that's Bruce Love, who had been harassing his then 12-year-old son. The family said Huck shoved the man away to protect the child from Love, who was verbally hostile and had intruded on his personal space, and though Love fell down, he was not injured. The altercation, a local matter that had long since been tossed out of court when Love failed to appear for the hearing, somehow drew the interest of U.S. Department of Justice under the Biden administration and Attorney General Merrick Garland. There you have Merrick Garland again, DOJ. So in other words, it was an altercation outside of an abortion facility. Huck is an anti-abortion activist. This individual, Love, is a pro-abortion activist. Huck alleged that this 70-year-old man was arguing with his son, entered his son's personal space. He pushed the man back. The man fell down. The man was not injured. The case went to court. The case was thrown out because Love did not show up to court. Now, in a normal sense, this would barely even reach the threshold of maybe a criminal issue. You could even say this could be like just a personal, liabilities court or something like that. A minor altercation that would not justify anything higher. In terms of charges, you could argue maybe it was assault or battery. That which would of course be a little higher up, but it didn't go anywhere, right? Even low-level courts, even low-level crimes, it didn't go anywhere. But then Merrick Garland, under the DOJ, on the morning of September 23rd, sent a team of 25 to 30 FBI agents and around 15 vehicles to swarm the property of this man. Not the individual who approached the 12-year-old boy, but instead the anti-abortion activist who pushed that man. Weapons drawn. This is a quote now. They started pounding on the door and yelling for us to open it, according to Mark's wife, Ryan Marie. Frightening their children, the agents arrested Huck and took him away, charging him with violating the Federal Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, or FACE Act. So apparently you can no longer protest at abortion clinics because you're violating the freedom of access to clinic entrances. What clinic entrances? Abortion clinics? Did they create an act to specifically bar people from protesting at abortion clinics? And they say it's due to a claimed attack of a patient escort. Now, further in it states, whereas the Biden Justice Department alleges 2 instances of Huck shoving Love. So there's the Department of Justice under Biden is saying that this man, Huck, shoved this old man twice, not once, as the original complaint alleged, suggesting the FBI is changing the evidence, suggesting the FBI changed the claims of the original charge. They altered it. And it's one of which occurring while the latter attempted to escort 2 Planned Parenthood patients. Love's original complaint only alleges 1 instance that occurred while he was waiting for clients, with no mention of escorting anyone. In other words, the charge that the Department of Justice has brought out has 2 things that did not exist in the original complaint. Again, the charge, they sent 25 to 30 FBI agents to go after a guy for a charge they got thrown out of low-level court because the guy who claimed he was wronged didn't even show up. How is it that a low-level crime like this can reach the level of a federal crime where they send 25 to 30 FBI agents to the home of a family? To arrest them in front of their children, to arrest him in front of his children. And the complaint itself changes the evidence. Again, because what they're claiming he did was attack a patient escort, which violates the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act. The problem is, in the original complaint, the individual said he was waiting for clients, not escorting clients. And so the FBI changed that evidence. And the FBI also changed the evidence, saying that instead of shoving the individual once, which you could say was an act of self-defense to move the individual away from his child, shoved him twice, which could constitute aggravated assault because you do it more than once, which may not be necessary. This is bizarre, right? This is again the Biden DOJ basically, doing things that we've never seen the FBI do before. At least I've never seen them do anything like this. Further in on this, Trump actually said something interesting, and this is something that, frankly, it could actually backfire. Really, this type of behavior is probably doing the Democrats more harm than good, frankly, because it's making them look like Nazis, and I'm just saying that in the truest sense. It's making them look like Nazis. And the Republicans are going to be using it to win elections. Trump is already using this to win elections, or trying to win an election. Epic Times had this. It said, Trump says Biden DOJ rounding up pro-life activists all over the country. It says, former President Donald Trump has said the Biden administration is targeting pro-life activists following a recent spate of FBI arrests. During a Saturday night rally in Nevada, Trump said President Joe Biden and federal officials are, quote, turning America into a police state, and several arrests of high-profile pro-life activists after. It says, before our eyes, this is Trump saying this, before our eyes, Biden and his left-wing handlers are turning America into a police state, who then accuse, Trump said this, and Trump goes on to accuse the White House of ignoring vandalism and arson against pregnancy centers and pro-life organizations following the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade earlier this year. He's noting this, that while an individual shoving a guy in front of a pro-life clinic will get the individual raided by 25 to 30 FBI agents. The left and the actual terrorist organizations, actual terrorist organizations are firebombing abortion, pro-life clinics, birth clinics, and so on, pregnancy centers. They're firebombing them. They're threatening Supreme Court justices. The people making threats against sitting Supreme Court justices, they're not having 25 to 30 FBI agents raiding their home. But, an individual pushing a guy outside a clinic gets his home raided, even after it's been thrown out of low-level court. And Trump says, look at what's going on. After ignoring violent attacks on pro-life clinics, the Biden administration is rounding up pro-life activists all over the country. First, they arrested the minister that you all read about. Then this week, they arrested grandparents with guns drawn, many agents storming into their little houses, putting them in jail. And there's even more to this. I'll go over one more point with this, then we'll jump over exclusively to Epic TV, because I want to talk about Hunter Biden after this, and I don't know what YouTube will do to me with that. So we'll go exclusively at Epic TV after this. But I want to finish this piece, right? Epic Times had something else. They're saying the Department of Justice will come after you if you disagree with if it disagrees with your position, and this is according to a complaint. It's a subpoenaed nonprofit that is basically fighting back against some of this stuff. It says the Department of Justice has issued a subpoena to Alabama-based conservative nonprofit Eagle Forum. I've actually won an Eagle Award, actually. It's a pretty good organization. But the DOJ is going after them, and it's going after them for exercising its constitutionally protected free speech rights in a case involving transgender treatments for children. And remember, folks, we discussed how, again, they're targeting parents under, again, this groundless allegation. There was no evidence supporting it from the teachers' associations suggesting parents should be investigated. From the school boards suggesting parents should be investigated. Now the medical association is saying that organizations that created information going after the trans movement, that they themselves should be investigated. Well, Eagle Forum is being investigated for this. Eagle Forum had lobbied the Alabama legislature to pass a law that blocks children from treatments that alter their gender. Earlier this year, the legislature passed the Alabama Vulnerable Child Compassion and Protection Act. Yeah, compassionately sterilize your child, folks. It's compassionate, right? Anyways, about this one I'm sorry, that's actually a good one. That one in particular actually bans hormone therapies, puberty blockers, and surgeries aimed at changing the biological sex of a minor. But left-wing organizations sued the state, and the DOJ intervened in the lawsuit, claiming that the new law violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. It's nice to see they care about some parts of the Constitution still, but the DOJ then issued a subpoena to Eagle Forum, which is not even a party in the lawsuit. They're not even involved in the lawsuit, but the DOJ is issuing a subpoena against them. And the subpoena is asking for 5 years of records of Eagle Forum on anything having to do with the issue of gender dysphoria. And based on that, the Eagle Forum is saying that if you disagree with their position, the Department of Justice will come after you. This, again, ties to the issue I raised earlier in this episode, that, Biden giving himself the ability to initiate any kind of domestic spy operation and to then withhold that information from the public simply by claiming that exposing it would, risk the national security would be a risk to national security. That he's demonstrated under the behavior of the DOJ that nothing is out of bounds. Even groups that have no involvement in altercations, like the Eagle Forum in this case, no involvement in cases, can be investigated through extension of cases if the DOJ just deems it on a whim. They are ruling by decree, essentially. They're behaving like the redcoats, prior to the American Revolution, kicking down doors, hypothetically speaking. kicking down well, maybe literally if you're a pro-life activist, kicking down doors and arresting people and searching and doing whatever the heck they want. They believe they have a blank, just an open slate, it seems, to just violate any right you have that they so choose. And it's a two-tier justice system. Again, while a guy pushing someone outside of an abortion clinic can have 25 to 30 agents going to his door, people throwing fire bombs at pro-life clinics, just nobody even looks into them. They can threaten to kill Supreme Court justices and nothing happens to them. Two-tier justice. And again, the weaponization, not just of the DOJ and the FBI, but the weaponization of the intelligence collection system and even probably domestic surveillance based on the way we've seen this behavior being kind of carried out. Beyond that, folks, what you see is law enforcement. It's a level of law enforcement being mobilized for what would normally be handled by local police. Some of these issues would barely constitute even criminal court. A lot of these would be like, just really kind of personal. When you have a personal issue with someone, you go to court. Personal liabilities, whatever else, like really just low-level court. These would not be major crimes, but you're seeing these even going beyond just the normal legal practices to the point where the FBI, which we originally would think they're hunting down like foreign spies and communist agents from other countries like Russia and China, they're not doing that anymore. They're playing the role of local law enforcement with federal crimes that are things that it seems to be pulling out of thin air. This suggests the Biden administration what this really suggests, though, beyond all this, is the type of behavior that the Biden administration has used to justify such behavior. That it suggests that the Biden administration has elevated certain key issues to the level that they will, use the FBI to go after them. These include, for example, critical race theory. It includes abortion. It includes the trans movement. These are issues that they seem warrant federal investigations, even very minor issues involving any of these three topics. They are mobilizing the FBI to go after people on. And also, this is including when there's no serious violence. Like, you would think they would go after things that would constitute actual, like, terroristic threats or so on. These are minor cases. Someone pushing someone, like a schoolyard, like a schoolyard fight, not even a fight. When I was a kid, if you pushed someone and you were maybe gonna fight, but you didn't fight, you wouldn't get suspended, right? That was something even a school wouldn't care that much about. But here they have the FBI raiding people's homes over it. It raises the issue, folks, of what they would mobilize these new spying powers against. And I don't want to be, I don't want to be kind of extreme in any way in terms of the way I'm framing this, but based on behaviors, it is a concern. Right? Based on behaviors, it is a concern that they've created these new powers, and what will they use it for? If even without those powers, they've taken it this far. We'll see. All right, folks, that said, let's go into Hunter Biden because, well, federal agents seem they're ready to prosecute Hunter Biden. This really, a lot of this is kind of leading up to the midterm elections. And again, even though I'm talking about FBI and the crazy things it's doing, frankly, I think that the Democrats are making themselves look bad, frankly. I don't think it's going to work out for them. I think that this really extreme use of the FBI is making them look like Nazis. It's making them look like the Gestapo. It is not serving their interests, and I don't know why they think it's a good idea to be so extreme over minor issues. My assumption is that they feel cornered, and their key topics seem to be things that they're very extremely defensive over. That any kind of rhetoric they've tried to resolve issues, I do think the establishment wanted Biden in place because they thought that he was a bit more of a moderate compared to many other Democrats. he was the tough on crime guy, for example. Ironically, he pardoned. All right. Ironically, Biden just pardoned people for federal marijuana crimes. Most of those people facing federal marijuana crimes were only charged because of Joe Biden. And in the early 1990s, I think it was like 1993 or 1994, Biden himself created the law. It was his thing that created the laws that put a lot of those people in prison. And Kamala Harris was the tough on crime prosecutor who put a lot of them in prison, like in the very literal sense. I do think the establishment really thought that Biden would be able to kind of unite the right and left establishment, and they didn't anticipate that it wouldn't happen. They didn't anticipate, I believe, that the political dynamics of the country have changed so drastically, mainly because of Trump and the Trump movement, although I would say that Trump was more of a symptom of something that was already changing. I'd say more like the Tea Party movement, or a kind of awakening that has been taking place in the country. And I do believe that because they see this, they're trying to frame the MAGA type movement as extreme to try to make people distance from it. But they don't realize, I think, how deeply entrenched it already is. They don't realize that the status quo will not be reestablished of what used to be the Republicans and Democrats and the right and left of the, uniparty, right and left wing of the same bird of prey type thing, right? I don't think that, I think they anticipated they'd be able to bring it back, and that if they somehow get rid of Trump, that the movement will die with him. When in reality, they're noting that this is not even just a U.S. issue. This is a global issue. This is a global change in the political climate that no matter what, and so on that note, they're taking things to more and more extremes, mobilizing the intelligence agencies, mobilizing domestic surveillance, mobilizing the FBI to try to hit these groups, make them look like they're extremists, make them look like they're domestic terrorists, framing them as such, and trying to, by doing so, make the rest of America who might align with that type of idea want to distance themselves from it. There's a saying, though, which is, what you resist persists. And frankly, again, I think that by doing so, they're destroying themselves. I think that the establishment, they are destroying their own reputations through this extreme behavior. They are behaving in extreme ways while accusing others of extremism. And it's not working for them. I think it's going to make them lose by a landslide. If not, we'll see what happens with the elections, but I think it's going to make them lose by a landslide, if not only through the election process, at least by public support and credibility. I don't think this is going to work out for them, even though on the surface they're behaving in very extreme ways. All right, folks, that said, let's jump over exclusively to Epic TV. I know I went a bit longer today, and I'm glad you're all here with me. I want to, after this, go into Hunter Biden, then we'll go into questions. Before I jump over, though, let me show you a quick trailer. I spoke with Michael Dougherty. Michael Dougherty, he ran a company. It's a very interesting story. He ran a company that was spied on by a company that had provided with a spy tool by the FBI, which was then used to try to prosecute him through the U.S. government, claiming that he was responsible for a breach using a tool the FBI gave a company, which then tried to extort him, allegedly. It's a bizarre case, a really bizarre case. And he's saying that this is basically a trend of abuse and power that we've seen for a long time. Let me show you this trailer. Then we'll jump over exclusively to Epic TV.
It relates to the playbook of we make the rules, we break the rules, we have deference from the courts. The courts give us the benefit of the doubt. There we have judges appointed within our enterprise of politics. It is so hard to get a fair trial.
You were targeted by a company that got technologies from the FBI to spy on people.
This is the danger of having these government lawyers involved in technology and medicine. They are very powerful and very ignorant. So they didn't understand they were dealing with a cyber criminal, and then they were weaponized by the FBI. This country was built on the separation of powers, which meant accountability, and we have slowly lost our separation of powers, and these people have no accountability. again, what's new is us waking up to that.
All right, folks. That being said, let's jump over exclusively to Epic TV. If you don't have an account yet, come join us. I do an 1.5-hour show on Epic TV, live Q&A. So come join us. Come join the community. Ask some questions. It's always a really great conversation there as well. We'll see you there. And folks, thank you for being here. I'll emphasize again that, frankly, it's like at this point, I'm almost happy. I'm almost glad that YouTube